Terry is a Senior Manager of Products for the Institute of Electrical and Electronics Engineers, and she worked with Pete Scott on preparing this content, who could not join us today because he's traveling, but he's the VP of Operations and Development for NAVC. So Terry, take it away.
Thanks a lot, Mary. And thanks in absentia to Pete Scott, who was really swell, because we sort of got together and did this. And I would say to anyone who's already signed up to do a domain, that's good, because it's going to force you to kind of take a look more deeply at the content, or at least it did us, so we were happy to do it. So we'll find out at the end if what we did made sense. And thanks a lot to Mary, who has just been an amazing leader for this crowd, I got to tell you. All right. All right, how can I advance my slides? Why is this being wacky? There we go. Okay, what we wanted to do, and we looked at this as a structure that could work across domains, if in fact this does, so we'll take a minute at the end to make sure, to tweak it if needed. We're going to go into sort of a deep dive on the domain, what's in there. Then we're going to take an interactive break for Q&A, try to see if there are things that come to mind as you look through the stuff. What Pete and I did is look through the domain content, do the reading, and then we pulled out some key aspects, and we got a lot of help from the CAE resources out on ASAE. Then we're going to go through some practice questions. These are actual questions from a variety of CAE test exams, and I kind of came up with an approach for how to play that one. I'll tell you when I get there. And then we're going to look at some resources that are going to give you even more to look at in Domain 3. And then, as I said, we'll see if all this works. We'll evaluate what we did, and we'll get ready for the next crowd. Any questions on what we're going to do here? Okay, off we go. So Domain 3, excuse the typo in the what is, this is what's in there. It's all of these things that sort of relate to the high level of administration. You can read the list. We won't need to get into that because we're going to go deep into it right now. What I wanted to do first, though, is to kind of get our heads around, we're here so that we can take the test effectively, let's be frank. So some of the things that I took out of the boot camp that I actually went to a couple of years ago were these key principles that still keep coming up. So I would ask that you maybe get your head around these as you're thinking about and looking at what's in the domain. So these were little techniques that they talked about. We'll talk more about this a little later in terms of mindset. But the SPIE that you might remember, the LERP, and then a couple of other principles, structured decision-making, making sure that, as a CSE, which is our mindset, that things are done in a structured and repeatable way, and then managing risk for the association and its members and assets. So human resources is the first element. Some of the areas it covers are listed here. It's everything about human resources, from the processes you need to have for performance review, some of the documentation. One of the things that cuts across every part of this category are both laws. You see here federal laws. And it's important to understand that while there are state laws, and sometimes you might need to make a differentiation between facilities. For example, if you have facilities in different states and even countries, as my organization does, the focus for the CSE is the federal laws, and that's really where the test focuses as well. We did a few call-outs over here. This is, if you kind of think about this as the main takeaway, your goal is to establish and maintain a work environment that fosters teamwork, communications, and efficiency to make sure that we're retaining good staff and assuring organizational efficiency. Those key words are going to be helpful, and it appears will be helpful in all of the test questions as well. So sort of having that mindset. Some of the things that kept coming up in the reading were some trends, and what we understand is on the exam there will be, the questions will be done in the context of some of the trends that are perceived as the most current things that we're dealing with in human resources. So you can see some of them here. And some of the test questions did in fact relate, at least the ones we saw, did relate to a lot of this. So these are sort of fair game for exam information. The interesting one at the end, staff without association backgrounds, I haven't seen a lot of reading on that, but it's something I'm kind of interested in, so we'll kind of see what we do there. My organization, I don't know about yours, is really encouraging people to study the association management techniques regardless of their level in the organization. More on human resources. Again, this is all in the domain. The big thing is make sure you have the rules, you know the rules, you're consistent, and that your staff knows the rules. and some of the topics that are covered in the reading are listed here. Very much about hopefully we all sort of have seen this either as an employee or as an employer and understand that these are all critical areas, some tied to law, and some, if you think about that LERP, what's legal, what's ethical, what's reasonable, and what's practical, there's a hierarchy there, and it really comes down to legal is the most important, ethical is the second most important, but very important is how they tell us. Recruitment, hiring, training, some of the things that are covered in this area include both best practices like setting up an orientation and some of the critical legal areas like permissible questions, and there is a list of those available in some of the reading. Job descriptions, really, hello and welcome, whoever just joined us. We're going through Domain 3, and the one area of Domain 3 is human resources. So in job descriptions, position descriptions, one of the elements that wasn't really covered except in some of the later reading was the concept of establishing core competencies and providing adequate coaching, supervision, and training. So this is a real theme. It's very much about a system thinking, an ongoing, continued part of job descriptions as a part of both the performance planning and performance implementation process, which was a big theme. And we'll look at that, and there's the performance review process, just as discussed. Again, has to be formal, written, and regular. There's a lot of emphasis on praise, not just catching people doing something wrong, but certainly catching them doing things right, and then building on that and tying compensation to performance against formal plans. Obviously, there's got to be disciplinary processes that are very clear and documented, and then over and over the emphasis was being consistent. So and that would be a theme that we'd see in the test. Consistent application of these processes across the organization at all levels. Compensation, one of the things that we got into, if you dive deep in this reading, and I'm sure some of you have already done that, are some of the things that, grades of salary, hopefully not too many. If you've got, our organization, for example, used to have literally hundreds of grades for 1,000 employees. We're a fairly large organization. We've reduced those grades significantly to 12 bands. And that was something that was guided by ASAE thinking. In the yellow box, develop, implement, and manage a strategic compensation program. So you're building to the future for it. So that's this is one of the areas of human resources that the reading really tied to this idea of system thinking. Everything is in a cycle and as CSEs, and that's what we're supposed to be, our mindset. We're really thinking about the future of the staff, the future of the operation, and everything that isn't even here, like succession planning and so on. And then I did make a note on that rebuttable presumption test, which was in a lot of the notes, and that's basically about executive compensation, and that's actually a checklist from the IRS that you can get. Human resources is a lot. Don't worry, every section isn't this long, but there really was a high percentage of HR stuff within the reading. Knowing the federal laws, and there's a lot of places to do it, knowing that you've got to have it, relying on your own experience, and then the bottom line common core is how would you want to be treated, and if at the end you can answer those questions, that's probably going to be a good common sense guide to test taking. Moving to technology, and my colleague Pete has key elements of technology, and he added a whole lot of value here, which was really well, and throughout. One of the key elements, contracts for your necessary services. It's interesting for some, we get into some discussions about, buy versus build, whether it's on technology or other outsourcing. The mindset that we saw within the literature was a lot of contracting for necessary services, so we put that as the first bullet because it seemed to be a theme. Determine what systems you need, oversee their maintenance, and so on. And then making sure that your plan has a plan for emerging technologies. So, maybe 5 years ago we were all looking at mobile. What are we looking at now? And then the bottom line there, IT in service to your goals, was over and over and over a repeat. So some of the questions that we looked at basically almost felt like a trick. Like oh, that might be kind of cool to do, but is it in service to our goals? Is it really within our sweet spot? Is it getting us where we need to go? So there's a lot of a reasonableness and a practicality in that LERP model when we looked at technology. Again, some basic, bread and butter stuff, periodic scheduled upgrades, manage it through a system. Make sure you're looking at what you need, not just through your internal view of your staff, but your members. Outsourcing we talked a little bit about before, and we'll talk about again in vendor relationships. Understanding the total cost of owning your systems, and that gets into some of the decisions that would need to be made, and there were some scenarios and case studies on this. Some of that had to do with outsourcing. Some of it had to do with making decisions about, do I own all these servers, do I rent them, do I own this IT technology and human resources, or do I, how do I handle it? And what's the real cost of owning, maintaining, and managing all that? And then, of course, management of risk, and you'll get into that in business planning, continuity planning, protecting your IP, and so on. So that's the yellow box. Develop and implement systems that are secure to make sure you've got data integrity and prevent unauthorized access. What a lovely, lofty statement that's sometimes a whole lot harder to do than say. Again, one of the messages here, we kind of listed a few things that were really important for a CSE to understand. Basic communication technologies. Those technologies are going to change and need to understand them anyway. Communicate about how technology could help things be better from both an operational efficiency perspective and a member service and member program perspective. And then this quote was from someone out on the ASAE site related to this particular domain. As a CSE, you don't have to be the geek, but you'd best be an informed consumer. And an analog to that was used in the legal area as well. You don't need to be a lawyer, but you know when to call one. Speaking of legal. So basically, everything in the domain talks about identifying, retaining, and effectively managing your counsel, and that's sort of that's the umbrella statement. But it comes down to contracts, all the some of the hiring pieces, a lot about antitrust, and there's a lot of reading in the law handbook about antitrust. Understanding if you've got policies that are tied to federal laws, that they are in somehow alignment with local and state laws, and there was a lot of that in there. Maintaining your governance documents. You'll remember, for those of you who've been in the boot camp or done a lot of the reading, the governance documents were really critical, and those, whether they were in the embryonic phase or a current phase of an organization, very important to maintain them, understand them, and of course have legal review. Legal gets involved in insurance. Legal gets involved in IP. Legal gets involved. We talked a little bit, and this came up in several parts of the reading, that Sarbanes-Oxley, it doesn't fully apply to those of us in the association universe, but it really does apply in a couple of areas. And so these are things that all good associations would need to have and will need to be accountable for as CSEs. These are just a subset of some of the good governance rules the IRS tells us we should have, and there's lists and good stuff everywhere. And there's samples. There's all, if you had a small association, there's all kinds of help on this stuff. This was a takeaway in terms of the reading and the learning, which basically says some part of the test says consult legal counsel. Just do it. That's probably the answer. They also say if you're looking at a question that has a legal component, think about what's known, project the future as an unknown, and that's a legal mindset that will help in the test. And then you see that last statement here. As the CSE, and we're all CSEs, we're the legal protector. We need to know the danger. How are we doing out there?
I think good. We're getting a little bit of feedback, so if you can mute your lines, that would be helpful. Not you.
Okay. I was going to say, that'd be tricky. Thanks, everybody. Moving on to facilities management. So this whole administration domain, it's got a whole lot of bells and whistles and little pieces in it, but they are all related. So facilities management, you're really looking to have the work environment wherever that is, and there's a little discussion of telecommuting and whether that work environment is sort of your home office or the work environment is the office space. All the way around, facilities management talks about assuring that environment is compliant with laws and regulations so that it's safe and accessible. But there's other areas that fall into facilities in this domain. Some of it is, of course, having a business continuity plan. And that's a big focus now, a crisis management plan that's organization-wide. Not just crisis management, which might be, for example, in my organization and all of us in the Northeast, we learned a little bit more about crisis management after Sandy. But the other is to have other types of crises. There might be crises that are specific to the nature of your organization, and those kind of details need to be taken into consideration as you develop a plan. Point being, you got to have a plan. And then there's other sort of relationships here on whether you own your property or you lease it, and there's pros and cons from a testing perspective. The reading kind of tells us just don't overthink it from the test. Go to what's practical, what's in service to the organization, what's going to be the best from a strategic perspective to assure the long-term quality and efficacy of the organization while assuring that the environment is compliant. So it's sort of a balancing act, but when in doubt, go toward what's important to the association and spend a couple of bucks was the theory. More on business continuity, which is an aspect of facilities management. These are the big 5 points of what it is you're doing. The third one is interesting. You want to communicate clearly and in a timely manner with everybody. If you're talking about business continuity, whether that's from a crisis and perspective or from a where are we going from here perspective, and to restore lost services. So one of the questions they pose, which we thought was kind of neat, and we put it here, what's the real risk? And that's what you have to ask yourself. What is truly important and truly irreplaceable? And the point in this particular scenario that we studied was it's not the servers. You can replace your servers, you can replace your hardware, but your data, your information, your human resources, your intellectual capital, your institutional memory, those are the things that you really have to think about as you're thinking about a continuity plan. The next element of Domain 3 is vendor supplier. And this is where we get sort of more into the outsourcing pros and cons, but a lot of detail on RFP processes. What you need to do. The overall takeaway was in terms of RFPs and vendor relations, you need to have a system, a process. There has to be transparency to that process. Then, of course, there's some laws underpinning it all. But part of that gets into the understanding that you've established your measures for decision making up front and that your RFP ties back to those. So it feels like common sense, but those are the kind of things that are going to come up in the questions on the exam. And then thinking about managing and evaluating your performance. So part of it is when you're going to bring in an outsourced vendor or partner with someone on whatever it may be, what are you going to be your shared measures of success and or progress, and tie those right back into the contract situation. So this is a very a system approach to thinking, and they went over and over it in vendor supplier. And then in the yellow box, look at the cost-benefit ratio to see whether outsource makes more sense, or if you need to actually build that function into your organization, and then whether or not that's practical. Who owns the material? There was an awful lot of time and energy spent both within the actual domain reading and in some of the conversations that had come up about it as we dug deeper out on the ASAE site. A lot of talk about IP and copyrights, and there's a nice link here that was helpful. Who gets paid for what? When we look at things like open access, it gets into even more interesting conversations. Bottom line, though, whether it's your vendor relationship as tied to your IP, whatever it is, get it in writing, and then, of course, just underscore all of this with legal, right? You always also want to have a conflict of interest policy, and that's something that ties to staff, but also to vendors. And so your vendors, your suppliers, and your staff should be taking an annual conflict of interest and confidentiality notification process. Last element of Domain 3 is business planning. And this is essentially, you can read what this is. It's sort of what we all do, I guess. Aligning the association activities and operations with a business plan in support of strategic goals. So it's getting down to the tactics within the, that get you to achieve those strategic goals. One of the things they put in business planning, and I think it comes up in some other domains, I meant to check and I kind of ran out of bandwidth, was to identify, retain, or manage an accounting service. So again, whether you've got that in your own group, you're doing some kind of partnership, the accounting services are there to support decision making and plan, not just to add up the columns. It's kind of one of the ways one of the persons put it. And then once you identify your objectives and strategies and tactics, that's all going to be elements within your business plan, right? So one of the other things to know is there should be a business plan for the association overall, but more any program, any new and existing programs and products and services should have business plans. And then, in the perfect world in which we will all be CSEs, all those plans should tie back up roll back up into and make sense with the overall strategies of the organization. And then long-range funding and needs plans that tie to those business plans. And then again, the business continuity plan. So once it's all figured out where you're going, obviously with planning, and one of the things we talk about here, forgive me for editorializing, I don't mean to, but as we go toward the plan, toward the objective, using these business plans is to have periodic sort of touch bases and make sure that you're always assessing, refining, and moving through a cycle. Again, that cycle thinking. And that, how about that? Was that fast enough? That was domain 3.
Woo!
I'm exhausted.
Yeah, give yourself a pat on the back. That was amazing.
So we now have a few minutes for people to ask questions about domain 3, what's in it, what's not in it. But just as a reminder, what we're going to do after that is some practice questions, some reading, et cetera. So I'm going to have a drink of water. Hi, everybody.
Does anyone have questions for Terry on domain 3 or anything you want elaboration on?
This is Cheryl Gendron. I just wanted to just thank Terry. That was fantastic. That was a great overview.
Oh. Thank you. Appreciate it.
I agree. This is Nancy Cooks. It was great. You've really set the bar high. And the other thing I'm wondering is, can we have copies of these slides? Because I think it's great for review.
Sure. Absolutely. And in fact, I'll also tell you that my colleague Pete, who gets all great credit, went out and found there is in fact a model slide deck for each domain, and it becomes a really nice baseline. So what we did, and it's all out there, and Pete knows where, and we'll definitely get that link to you with Mary's wrap-up. But what we found was that this domain overview, which was out on the out in shared lands, was pretty good. And then what we did is we used that as a baseline for our own reading, and where we had like a challenge or we weren't sure, we dug in a little deeper, and it really shortcut our preparation and informed our study. So it was kind of cool.
Fantastic.
Yeah, so
for all presenters, know that there is help out there.
It's on Collaborate. I'll share that with you guys. And I'll get Nancy's slides too. I had a question, I guess, on the HR piece. Even in the content outline, that's a huge chunk of this domain.
Yeah.
And specifically around kind of some of the employment law, and I know a lot of that will be memorization, but have you, and anyone else who may have found this too, has anyone found a good resource that kind of summarizes all of those in a good way? I know there's like a table in professional practices, but has anyone run across anything that kind of helped you get those a little better grasp of those?
And I would just like to extend on that. This is Cheryl Gendron again. There are so many little niches of, like, we need to know that this many employees qualify for OSHA, this many employees qualify for FMLA. So if any of us have any little ways to remember these, that might be helpful too.
This is Amy Kane. I work with Mary. I have a list someone provided me that has like a couple little mnemonic tricks to remember a lot of those laws. So I'll share that with Mary to include with the materials, because it was kind of helpful. It was just a few little mental tricks that have helped me along the way.
Oh, that's terrific. Actually, Pete and I were kind of looking for stuff, and we gave ourselves a little test of some test questions, because we were really nervous about all the law stuff. And what we found ourselves doing, I don't know if this is good, bad, or indifferent, we found ourselves thinking, oh, okay, if I read the name of the law, like, because you're going to have it in a multiple choice question, the name of the law often will guide you to what it is you're trying to get to. So it wasn't perfect, but then we kind of talked ourselves into the fact that that was kind of easy. I'm not sure if it was. And then we went back to the key concepts, which had a little bit more explanation on the laws and the professional practices list. Between all that, we convinced ourselves we knew what we were doing. We may have been fooling ourselves. I don't know. So that might help people. I don't know.
Oh, this is
Just
Nancy.
really
I had someone that
go
ahead. I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
Oh, I had someone who took the exam tell me that the laws that we needed to know are the ones that are in our CAA kickoff sheet, the little booklet.
Beautiful.
And that scales back that whole chart.
Absolutely. There was also something that Mary shared, which is sort of law, but also HR, which, and we'll attach it, was Jerry Jacobs' Top 10 Employee Handbook Policies, which is a really good, and it not only was the top 10 policy issues to be aware of, but it also tied each of them to the law. So that was kind of helpful to me because it was in a human bite. It was just 10. Any other questions or thoughts before we move on? Silence is assent?
Indeed it is.
All right. So I think what we'll do now is sort of, oh, what was the name of the last book you mentioned? I see a question on the table. I think someone mentioned professional practices. Is that correct?
I mentioned professional practices, and someone mentioned the kickoff, the ASAE kickoff course book.
Right. Does that answer your question, Althea?
And that's not the big book. That's not the big book, right? That's the little booklet that we got at the class. Is that correct? Is that what you're saying?
That's correct. That's what it was actually someone at ASAE told me that that they refined the ones that are the most important within the CAE kickoff book.
Oh, that's cool, because that's a tiny little thing.
Awesome. Thank you very much for clarifying.
Oh, that's great. Nice. So what we did next is we just pulled a few practice questions, and again, big props to Mary who gave us a couple of practice exams. I had practice exams from my last round going through boot camp, and we just pulled a few together. The way, we might do this some other way, but what we thought about was we took some questions that we found difficult and kind of argued with ourselves about, and then we did some that sort of represent other approaches to question taking. So what I've got here is like a handful of practice questions with the answers identified, and then one scenario question that I'd like to sort of throw out to the group once our heads are all around it. So that was what we decided to do. Let's see how it works. So the first one, what areas do you take into consideration in determining how far into the future an environmental scan should extend? I would ask you to take a look at all the answers, including the one that we know is correct, and discuss. And perhaps discuss why this would be correct.
Okay, well, I'll start with Oh, go ahead.
No, you go ahead. That's fine.
Oh, I was just thinking because no one was talking. Go ahead.
Well, what my thought is, it just seems like we always want to be as high level as possible. So, the highest level is the purpose of the scan. It's kind of similar to B, so I might have gotten confused between D and B.
That's
Good.
A good one.
Good, and that's sort of where we went to, was always start high, start big. Also that this would be equivalent in some ways to the first step. Any other thoughts on B is interesting because it's sort of like, okay, let me go back, and it's almost taking a scan, right? That our mission versus someone else's mission is almost an environmental scan in itself, but we argued with ourselves about that one too. The number of people available is sort of a resource question, and you might be able to modify that by being more creative in your approaches. And the budget allocation should follow later, was the thought. Everybody cool on that one?
I like the teasing out between B and D because they both seem okay. Yeah, I like that.
Okay. Well, and that brings up something that I'm going to talk about a little bit later, but now's a better time. In both the kickoff planning class and in some of the other test materials, they basically tell us there are generally two okay answers, two answers that feel right, and then there's a few techniques for trying to get to the most correct one, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. Here's a question. Which of the following is true regarding the personal liability of officers and directors? Have a look. You can see what the correct answer is, and then let's talk about it. Any thoughts on why B is the most correct?
I was looking at D.
I would say D is probably.
Yes, me too. Again, B and D.
Yeah.
Well, D.
No, this is Scott Morris, and I think it would seem that D would not be the correct answer because D&O liability, directors and officers liability, is only, I guess, for actions that the officers or directors take in the performance of their duties. Not, it doesn't really get to personal stuff, I guess.
Perfect. Nice job,
Yeah.
Scott.
Is the key word indemnify? Is that the word that we're looking at that's really, because it does pay claims or defend officers and directors, right? But when we look at the word indemnify, that's what's giving us the clue that it's not the best answer?
Well, but the question is, what is true regarding the personal liability of the
Yeah,
officer,
to me, this is an example that you've really got to read the question and see, what's in the question, and which would give rise to the logical answer.
And that was one of the things that, and by the way, Pete and I both picked D as well. We were wrong. But this comes back to another skill that was beaten into us, which was smart, which is read the question. The question will guide you to the answer. If you're in doubt, go back to the question and see if you've got some threads that'll get you there. Personal liability, maybe. D was, I actually called a few people on this one, and D was considered a distraction.
Yeah.
Close enough, not right. Sort of a big shiny object for you to go chasing down the path.
Right. I certainly would have picked D.
Can I just clarify again? I'm sorry, this is Cheryl.
Of course.
So what I'm seeing then is that we're talking about personal liability, and in that question, in D, it says protects the association.
Right.
So that's, okay, thank you. Thanks.
Perfect.
It's tough. They really want to trick you.
Yeah. It's tough, man. And that's one of the reasons we picked this one and hated it. So here's another one. Administrative technology policy should include. Here's your choices. Here's the correct answer. Discuss. Was anyone tempted to select anything other than C?
Well, what about A?
I love when people actually step up and say it. Everyone's like, A, in my mind, right?
Yeah, I think I would have picked A as well.
One of the thoughts was a policy of use might include a system review. That was one thought that this might be turned on its head, that if you had a policy on appropriate use, because that's an administrative policy. But we, too, argued about A. Appropriate use of your computer resources is probably the most practical, but we also argued that it could be A. Other thoughts? We don't have a conclusive thought on this one, except to know what we were told is the correct answer.
Hi, this is Tanika. The reason I wouldn't have picked A is because policy has nothing to do with financials. So investing is financial.
Nice one, Tanika. I love it.
Good.
And look at that word policy and policy tied together, B and C, but C is certainly more. Nice job. Cool. This is so helpful because none of us is as smart as all of us, that's for sure. Cool. Okay, let's do another one. Your organization has just completed the development of a new theme along with a name, logo, and tagline. What is the most important step you can take to ensure ownership of this intellectual property? Feel free to start at D, which is the correct answer, and then look at the others.
This is Cheryl Ginger, and again, I am curious if anybody else kind of read when they were doing the reading. It seemed to me that they were saying that most people don't get a trademark through the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office, and then I did experience this test question and was surprised by it. Did anybody else read that or get that from the readings? I guess not.
I don't remember it.
I think the key word in the question is ensure ownership, so not so much what the masses do, but legality that surrounds a logo or a trademark. In order to ensure it, you must go through the official steps.
Right, the only way to ensure it. That's a great point.
Good, good. And I think that's perfect. Ensure ownership. All the other pieces are administering what it is you have ensured that you own. Good? One more, I think, on the we're telling you the answer approach. An applicant's conditional job offer for a receptionist was withdrawn when functional testing revealed she was unable to perform unassisted lifting up to 45 pounds. The ruling in applicant's discrimination case favored the employer because it was shown that the lifting requirement was a documented essential function of the job. How was the lifting requirement documented? You can see that it was listed in the job description. I thought the other three were sort of interesting. Discuss.
I think A is the only thing that's actually documented.
Yeah, I was going to say, because B and C are discussed but not documented, and D is not even discussed or documented.
Even vaguer, right?
Yeah.
Good. We ticked this one as a theory of, gee, sometimes it's probably straightforward. Isn't that nice? That was our theory anyway. This one, we have not provided the answer. I can't remember the percentage. Mary, you might remember the percentage of scenario questions versus sort of what we were just seeing. But we know there are many, and they will take some serious reading. And we still only have 1.5 minutes per question. So here's one. You're conducting your first new director-level hiring process. You're determined to make it a participative process to demonstrate leadership to your new staff. All senior staff members screen the applications and interviewed the top 3 candidates. The senior management team recommends you hire Ms. Smith for the position. You believe her qualifications are fine for the position as it stands, but not sufficient to take the position to the next level. Which of the following is your best approach in response to the recommendation? We'll go for what's your answer and why.
I would choose D because if you created a process that is supposed to demonstrate leadership to your
Any other
staff.
takers? Thank you. That's good.
Yeah, I support D as well.
We have a D on the table.
Got another D on the table.
A couple of Ds?
Yeah,
for the
another
same
D.
reason?
Yeah.
Anyone looking for anything other than D?
Hi, this is Kimberly. I'm thinking that
Wait a minute.
D sounds really good, but I'm thinking it should be A because if I'm supposed to think as the senior person in making the top decision, somehow I have a feeling they're looking for A.
Okay, we have A and an almost B on the table. Anyone want to talk about C?
I have a question about D. When you look at it, it says, and hire the candidate you prefer. So you're going to meet with them, discuss your reservations, but still hire the one you prefer?
So I have an interesting thought on this question. I did another study group and we looked at this one, and they actually changed this one in the CAE study guide between
the
last version and this version, and they I think they realized it really wasn't a great question. So they changed D in the study guide to say, meet with senior staff, discuss your reservations, and reach consensus as to whether Ms. Smith is the right candidate.
With that, the way it was written, I would have gone with D.
D is a lot better of an answer with that change.
That is so interesting.
That's on page 161 of your ASAE big study guide book. But.
So here's something to be for me to confess. Since I have the older version of the study guide, I have the version that reads as you're reading it here, and B is the accepted answer. Accept the senior staff recommendation and hire Ms. Smith. Point being that you're determined to make it participative. You're determined to demonstrate leadership to your staff. So because of that, B was perceived the better answer. I couldn't agree more that with the rewrite to D, that would be the better way to play.
Yeah, so that would be, this is Tanika, the person that spoke earlier, that will be in the, I have the 2012, 2013. It's the same as, I guess, the ones that everyone has. Well, it might be a different year, but it's the same question.
And overriding this is the fact that wouldn't it hurt employee morale if you ask them to be part of this and then just override their decision with no discussion? Is that right?
Absolutely, and I think that's why B was the initial choice, the recommended choice. And again, and they make it clear in the scenario, you're determined to make it participative and to demonstrate leadership. Leadership doesn't always need to be hierarchical. Leadership can be leading by the example and being a servant leader. You know, I mean, those kind of conversations as well. I do agree, though, with the rewrite to D, it might be even harder. But B is in fact the accepted answer. So these are fun, right? Ish. And grueling. That's it for the practice question part of our day. Okay? Came up here with a couple of resources, and you will get these slides. And this was a standing sort of agenda item that we thought might work, so future presenters use it if you'd like. Oh, I'm sorry, I switched my my order, so forgive me. First, exam tips. So came up with a couple of things that we talked about a few of them earlier. Some of the things about mindset in order to bring to the exam and to our studying, because I found that if I kept these in mind, I was sort of reading better and not freaking out. Think like a CSE. Always, you know, don't think like whatever role you hold now. You're really to be the senior staff executive. Do think member to member, staff to staff, and board to board. So that's that whole concept of individual. You know, have an individual conversation to the degree possible and then bring it up. Focus on federal law. You may need to know state as well. No antitrust. A couple of key phrases that they talked about. Survey the members is usually a good answer, and consult legal counsel is usually a good answer if they're presented. And then one thing that was given, it just resonated well with me because I'm a baseball fan and it's playoff time, but think of the CSE as the baseball manager, establishing the strategy, but the specialists are executing it. So your second baseman's got to know what they're doing in the context of the overall game. Right? Whoops, sorry. A couple others. This is that SPIE process. That's sort of what it looks like. Using this is when you're looking for a process solution, this is where you want to go. Scan it first, plan it, implement, and evaluate. This also gets into something we'll talk about in a minute about system versus analytical thinking, which again was an underpinning for all of us being good CSEs in our future. And then LERP, which I talked about a couple of times as we were going through the domain overview. What I found interesting was that not only is it you want to think about legal, ethical, reasonable, and practical, but in a couple of places I found in my notes, which I had forgotten completely, that there's a hierarchy. So the most important is that it's legal. Really important, but not most important, is that it's ethical, and we could argue that all day. Reasonable is important, and practical is not as important, but you should try to get there. So if it wasn't practical to you know, sort of obey the law, you still got to do it, kind of a thing, I guess is how I took away that. This was, I found kind of helpful when I did my test exam. This was just some notes that I had. The structure of the questions, and then Mary shared with me that in speaking with a colleague who had recently taken the exam, it really became clear that if you understand the question and how the question is structured, it'll really, really aid in your success. So the idea is that every question has a stem, the core of it, and then some options presented, and you want to get to the key and eliminate the distractors. So maybe some of those distractors were what we saw earlier on that D&O question. But this little chart, it sort of helped me and it sort of confounded me. But these were, I thought, kind of helpful. If you understand why your selection is right and the other three are wrong, you're going to be great. But if you're not sure, you probably can get it to 2. So they said, if you're really not sure, go down and find out, like, well, this is clearly not right because of X, 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 and then focus. Another way is to sort of turn that on its head. As we looked at earlier, you might be able to say, okay, this is about personal liability. It's not about association liability, for example. When you've got 2, you want to select the most correct response, and you can use your LERP, your SPIE, your big picture kind of stuff, system versus analytic, whatever works for you. But you want to remember that when it comes down to those 2, the more correct answer was the one that was given most of it's the most correct most of the time based on what a group of learned peers would say. So that's kind of hold that in the back of your mind. Other tips that we kind of teased out of a lot of our work was don't read too much into the question, and then my favorite, read the darn question. Watch for clues. Is it a time thing? Is it a cause? Is it, are they asking for a who, a how? And then if you're asking for the best option or the first action or a structure, those are the kind of things that will help you to separate some of the distractors and try to get right to the root of that question. This was some notes literally that I took from when I was in that boot camp. And the idea of analytical thinking is for those of us in middle management, and systems thinking is for CSEs. So you really want to be, and it kind of shows the difference. So again, solve a problem, manage a project, start and finish, maybe work alone or in a small group, versus this is really getting the whole thing together. It's not about the parts, it's about the whole, and it's got to be leading us to the future. It's a little bit cliched, but solution seeking rather than problem solving, you can sort of see that. This concept of a cycle, which came up over and over as we were looking at both the domain itself and some related questions, and the idea of interdependencies as opposed to we can probably solve all this in a small group. Frankly, I don't see much that's independent in association management, but it may just be my experience. Some of the other clues of starting with, like, what is it we're trying to get to, and who are we trying to get to it for, our audience. How can we optimize the parts to maximize the whole? Helicopter, the idea of staying up above it, and we looked at that in some of the practice questions. And then one of the pieces of advice they gave us in the kickoff was to integrate all this language into your day-to-day work, because if you're practicing it in your day-to-day work, it's going to become a part of you in your studying, if in fact you don't do it now, because you may. Some things to read, and this is all, a lot of this is in the study guide as well. We added a few extra things. We just couldn't help ourselves. You're supposed to read the whole damn law book, but here's where D3 is. Lots of good stuff. Here's some very specific things, and I had some of the older page numbers here because of this particular domain, just to know. This is what I referenced earlier, and we'll attach that, the top 10 employee handbook policies, which was kind of cool. Some additional reading, which are kind of powerful, and there's plenty of it. More reading. And a couple of the activities that Mary was kind enough to share. These are some things coming up. There's a virtual lunch specifically on legal, so that would be parts of Domain 3. There's a financial coming up, and then there's the cram chats. Okay, now we're in the how did this work out open free discussion. Is this what we want to do?
Again, you've set the bar high.
Is it helpful?
I wonder, like, if the last slides where you talked about test-taking tips and the larger filters, I wonder if it's helpful just to repeat that briefly or talk about people's perspectives, every time, or do we want to have that every time, being that it's not really specific to the domain?
I love that, because to me, if I don't have filters are very helpful to me, because I tend to just go out and gobble up everything and then I can't focus. So That works for me. Team?
Can you
colleagues?
share that PowerPoint with the group?
Oh, sure. Yeah.
So that future.
I also think we can expect to have a slightly different group every time. So we have about 19 people on this call, but we have, I think, close to, I want to say like 50 people in the study group.
Wow.
I could be wrong. So, no, it's more like 35. But so I think the idea of kind of coming back to tips and tricks that people have heard, or a lot of us are talking to people who've taken the exam and have things to share. I kind of like that, weaving that in every time. So I think that's nice.
Yeah. You know, the other thing that, as we were going through this today, I got thinking, and there were a few questions, and forgive me for not jotting down your names, but where people said, gee, when I was reading this in this area, this is what it made me think of. That's really great, and it may be a lot to ask, but it might be if we know that a domain is coming up and there's something we're struggling with, we could come with those questions or even feed them to the presenters. You know, this is something that I've been struggling with, or that I've been thinking about, or that grows up for me, so that it becomes our conversation, not just the presenter's conversation.
This is Tanika. I think every week, I mean, whoever's doing whatever domain, I think it would be interesting just to see how people look at it, or their perspective of it, and not have it all tailored the same way. We all have different learning styles. We all take information totally different. So I think if some people who are going to be doing this like the format is the way it is, that's great. But I think just to see other people's perspective on the chapter would be good.
I like that.
And I felt like there was plenty of interaction. I thought this was wonderful. And everybody is very go-to friendly. I like it. Wasn't a big technology challenge.
Nice. Okay. So again, I think if we have other thoughts about it, you know, flip it to the group or to our friend Mary, who's herding all of WCATs. What I put as the last slide was basically the next call. And hey, Tanika, we're going to see your style next time. Yay. So the next one is Friday. It's domain 2. It's another big percentage hitter, and it's Pam Watson, Tanika Coates. Hope I got that right.
You did. That was fabulous. Thank you so much, Terry.
A pleasure, and again, real big thanks to Mary and Pete.
Fantastic. Thank you guys so much. This was wonderful.
I have to say, I didn't look at the clock till just now. I'm kind of happy. It's 1:54.
You nailed it.
Woohoo!
That's great. So I'm going to send an email out to everyone whose email I have. If you were on this call because you saw it on the CAE website on Collaborate, then just shoot me an email. I've left a couple messages with my email address, and I'll be happy to include you in our emails going forward. I've put the schedule on Collaborate, so you'll see everything coming up for the next 8 weeks up until exam day. And I think after hearing how much everyone contributed today, I think we have a really good group put together, and everyone is going to be really helpful in helping push each other to prepare and brush up on the areas that you may not be as comfortable with. So I think this was really, really helpful. Thank you guys all for participating, and we'll see you next week.
Thanks, everybody. See ya.